So I just want to acknowledge My Startup TV for streaming this on their platform. And through them, I'm hoping to reach a lot more viewers. Thank you, My Startup TV, for partnering with me on this. Appreciate it. All right. For people who don't know Richard, so Richard is one of the top HR professionals in the country today. Uh, he doesn't really carry that, tag on him, but have no doubts that he's, kind of made his mark in the field and in terms of his impact. Uh, so Richard used to be my boss, back when I was in Infosys, and we worked together for actually quite a decent amount of time. And one of the great things about him, apart from his accolades, is the fact that he was a great manager. And at that point of time, I was pretty young and I was a little hot-headed and all that. But he gave me the space to operate, and I think that's what he did with the thing. And if you look at the people who worked with him, most people have stayed. At least his immediate direct reports have all stayed with him for decades. And one of a good leader's testament is when people stick with a leader, and I think that's something which is extremely commendable. And his style, you have to get used to his style. Sometimes you go to him and tell him something, he'll just grunt and say, and so, and that that means okay, it's good, all good. So but I've really enjoyed and respected him for the impact that he's made on my career and my life. Richard is, of course, got almost 3 decades of HR experience, a bulk of it in Infosys. His last stint was executive vice president, and he was the head of human resources there before he moved to Tech Mahindra. He's currently the CHRO of Tech Mahindra, and obviously handles a huge portfolio. But today we are here actually to discuss his new book. And the book is called Human at Work. And this is the book. And I highly recommend you to buy it and to read it. And one of the few books which, I actually sat and read it end to end. Of course, I had a motive to finish it because I was preparing for the webinar, but still, most times, you can't really get through books that easily, and especially in our distracted world today. And and one of the things was that it had some great insights, stories, and also it was an easy read. It wasn't jargonish, it wasn't kind of difficult to understand. And you know and I would highly recommend that people go through it. And it had quite a few interesting concepts which were new to me. And having been in HR for a long time, I haven't really used some of those as well. So I think it's a great book for the spectrum of people, leaders, HR professionals, CHROs. I think the entire spectrum of people can benefit from this book. So thank you, Richard, for coming here. Is there anything that you would like to add with respect to your profile before we start getting into the questions? Anything that's close to you which I've not covered properly enough?
So, no, thank you, Sriram. You've been very kind. I don't think I made that much difference to so many people as you have alluded to, but it's been fun working with all of you. And that's why I dedicated to the book to the people I'd worked with. And I think you and many others made this possible. And I learned a lot from the many people I worked with. And so if many of it has been captured, it is thanks to the teams and the colleagues I have benefited from knowing and working with over the years.
Fantastic. So it's great to have all of you on the call today. And I think we have a good turnout of senior people. And I think that's one of the differences in this call is I've kind of stuck to the webinar format because it gives us the opportunity to interact. And the audience that we have is a good chunk of senior people who can also add perspective to what we are speaking. So feel free to put your questions in the chat. We'll of course have a section towards the end where we'll open it up for a full discussion. But even in between, if there are some good questions, I want to bring you up and, possibly include you in the discussion as a thing. So let's start with the book and the topic, Richard. So how did you arrive at the topic of human at work. Knowing you, I know, that that's a good topic and a good fit for who you are. But just with respect to the book and how you decided to write it, how come you chose this, and what went behind it?
Srilam, like many things, the book also evolved. And I think we evolve as professionals, the books also evolve. Human at Work started as a working title. I never meant it to be the final title, but as I wrote more and more of it, I think the editor and I both agreed that it was apt for the topic. And the reason why we chose it is there's a lot of writing and discussion about many other aspects of work. But all of us who are in the profession deeply know that how much the human factor makes a difference. Why we work with a team, why we stay in companies for a long time, why we enjoy going to office in the morning, why many of our memories go back to our workplaces where we were very happy. It's all to do with the human connections. And over, I think, the 2 or 3 years where we were away from work during the pandemic, many of us miss the fact that the interactions, the sense of belonging, the sense of discussions which are not really connected. And then it got me to set to think that if you take away the human part, then the workplace becomes very mechanical, very boring. So let's try to make our workspaces more humans. And as many of my colleagues and many of the managers who I have worked with, they have tried to bring their own unique touch. Some of it might be good, some of it may not be as good, but it is human, and that is what is unique. So the title kind of stayed, and the working title became the main title. In fact, it is human at work and not humans at work, because it's more of how you be human. So I meant human as an adjective more than a noun, and that is why it kind of fitted it.
Nice, very nice. And I still remember, the time that you had left Mangalore as head of the DC and I took over. And that was one of the best stints in my entire life. I still remember it very fondly. The reason I remember it is because of the people, the leadership, the values they had, the whole experience of, kind of working with people is probably what made it one of the best stints that I've had in my entire career. So, certainly human experience is a differentiator, and the more we kind of focus on it, the better. So let's start with your first, and I think there are already a few questions on the chat as well on the
Sriram, can feel free to either go with the chat or what you have in mind. So I'm open to either. So
yeah
I don't have
yeah
a particular restriction on which way you want to take this.
absolutely. So what is, I think this is a burning question. What is AI going to do to the human at work, right? And I know that you have, quite a lot of space dedicated to that in your thing. And I think, even as I am doing sessions for leaders, especially HR leaders, I think there's a little bit of a concern because automation has always existed, technology has always existed, but AI seems to have a slightly scarier impact. And because there seems to be a little bit more of unknown, or at least the perception that there's more of unknown around it. So and that's why I think even today people don't know what exactly it's going to do, how much it's going to do, and what dynamics it will change, and so on. So I'll open it out to your perspective. Yeah.
There's a lot of discussion, and I agree with you. I think we are discussing more about AI than AI itself deserves. The reason probably why is that this is the first time a technology has touched something which is very close to us and which has made a differentiator for us as a human race, is our intelligence. The previous automation, whether it was the cotton gin or the early textile mills or the typewriter, or even, for example, to a vast extent, the computer, were all tools which required the human to operate and enhance their capability. For the first time, we are seeing a technology where it is possible that near human or better than human intelligence will happen in certain areas for which we have long dominated or held as very close to us. So I think the fear or the concern is not misplaced, that if we let this go the way it is going, it could challenge us in something which we hold very dear. But that's the larger question. The closer question is how much will it impact work? And there, I see all of it being positive. I don't really see it being negative because it will augment our abilities at work. It will make us better at work. So the many use cases I see where AI is deployed intelligently, probably wrong phrase to use, but where AI is deployed has made people better. And you didn't see really the negative side as such. It just enhances us, which will also mean that we free up our capabilities to do other things. Like, for example, many of the routine things which any professional does at work could easily be taken over by their AI assistant and got it done, probably much better than a human being could, which also frees up time for the human to do other things. But it comes back to the point is how far will we allow this technology to go? Who will control it and where will it end? And if we control it, I think this is, it is just like, I mean, I was reading somewhere the example of various inventions by the human race, right? We discovered fire thousands of years ago, but the fire extinguishers and the fire station came many, many years later, in fact, centuries later. So just like that, I think the controls and the built-in areas will come in. Fact is that AI is out. It's not like we can ignore it. It is there. So now it's a question of how you want to use it and how you want to benefit it. And as HR, I think we have to move to the next stage of saying how we can make the workforce better at work rather than really worrying about where AI is going and how much impact it will have on these narrow things like will it misplace jobs, will it make certain people redundant. I think that's too small a worry for us. I think we should spend more time and effort looking at where it can take us, where it can make us better, and where it can deliver.
Yeah. So actually, it's an interesting thing, right? Because very recently, I was reviewing a tool called Friday. And it's like a AI tool, which is very similar to your Chat GPT kind of thing, except that it works on data analytics. So you put it on top of your existing people data, and then anything you want, it kind of pulls it out, shows it to you in a neat, kind of format, on demand, graphical, and to the point. So I was thinking, and they were thinking, can you, kind of talk to some HR heads about it and all that. My first response was, will HR heads want it? Because at some level, it's going to take away, some of their control that they have. Today, business has to come to HR, that HR is the gatekeeper. It then, kind of supplies that information. There are people dedicated to making dashboards and analyzing stuff and so on. And some of that may just vanish like that because the leaders don't need you. They're just going to have to ask that question and the answer kind of pops out. But the fact is that even if it pops out, the fact is there's going to be some background behind it. And HR is still going to be relevant, just that, they won't be able to hide behind data. They'll have to go deeper. And then that is, I think, when the difference is going to happen. Naresh, you want to ask your question, or is it answered with what Richard covered?
I think it is answered, Richard. I also want a few comments from you in terms of, how will this interplay, right? Because like you said rightly, automation had always been there, right? And with automation, we saw a certain level of disruption. But with Gen AI especially, I mean, some areas of the business especially, right, will be disrupted a lot more than the others. And the disruption as we see it panning out, can be such that you essentially may not need human, right? You may need human in the loop, but not necessarily to do the core task, right? A lot of the core tasks the machines can do a lot better. So fundamentally, right, wherever human does, the machines have to still work, and the balance sort of shifts, right, where the machine is sort of doing more, the human is doing less, perhaps important. So how do you see that interplay, right? More from a emotional perspective also, right?
So, Naresh, you asked a very pertinent question, and disruption, I think, is going to happen. So, there is no question about disruption happening or not happening. Disruption is going to happen. Disruption has happened at any point in time in human history where technology has kind of impacted day-to-day work. Disruption happened when the early mills started. Disruption happened when the early computer technology came into offices. So AI is going to be a disruptor. There is no doubt about the fact of disruption. So I think it comes down to all of us as managers as to what do we do with the abilities and the human factors which are accessible to each one of us at work, and how do we repurpose this. And rather than worry about what this technology is going to do to certain jobs, is how I have a human being or a colleague with me who comes with intelligence, who's very good at certain tasks and abilities. How do I repurpose them from the task they were doing, which is kind of going to get disrupted by technology, and repurpose them to something which is more beneficial or more useful to their abilities? And that is, I think, something which we should spend more time on, rather than worrying about the per se whether technology will come in and disrupt certain kind of jobs, which it is going to do. I think it is more important that we collectively get together. And like you said, if we do not do this, we are around 8 billion of us on the world, and we cannot afford a situation where you leave machines to take over many of these things, and people get unemployed and they don't know what to do. It will cause a different kind of societal disruption, which we are not ready for, which could actually be much more difficult to handle. So whether when we look at only the technology aspect, we do not consider the other aspect that necessarily people need things to do. They need the economics to work. They need to feed themselves and their families and have a reasonable type of living. So it's very good for us for certain people like us who probably will not get as impacted as many others who would. And this is an example which we often talk about, right? When any of us go through any of our large cities in India, you could be one set of, you could be pardon me for putting this as a very blunt statement, but if you are an engineer, you could either be the engineer who's programming the whole delivery sequence and how does the whole delivery sequence should operate, or you could be an engineer who couldn't get a job and was actually delivering the parcels which somebody else has engineered. And if you have too many of that, it's not a good place for the society to be in. And I'm not trying to sound socialistic or any of that, but except that it is a question which each of us, whether we are managers or anybody else, needs to think about seriously as to how to do we repurpose. And there, I think the concept of how much we can reskill, how much we can develop this comes to the forefront. And I don't think any of us can go away from that question.
Great.
Thank you, Richard.
So I think that brings up that question around skill passports. So, you've mentioned that in your, kind of book, and this is a good lead into that perhaps concept. So can you just explain to the audience what are skill passports and what is the purpose of that?
It started with a podcast I did many years ago, and that's the idea when I first placed it there. And I've expanded on that idea. And all of us, any manager who has spent time interviewing somebody or hiring somebody for a particular job, has experienced this whole question, right? Am I asking the right question? Am I making the right decision? And sometimes it's a matter of chance. However, if I could verify the work done by the individual, if I could verify what was their accomplishment, what is the level of aptitude they have, and let's take a very simple example. Suppose you want to hire a plumber to do a job. There is no way you will find out about that person's skill till you actually give him the job. But if you had a record of how good he did in his previous jobs, which he did as a plumber, then you could very quickly verify. And the whole skill passport is a digitally verifiable documentation of somebody's accomplishment. So whether you're a plumber or an engineer or a pilot or a dentist, we could verify it, and it's based on blockchain technology, so nobody can fiddle around with it. So anybody who engages any person for a job updates their skill passport, of course with certain safeguards that they to prevent that from happening. But you just have to check somebody's passport to know the kind of background the person had. And why the name is used is just like when you enter a country, somebody has verified that you are fit to enter a country, and the officer at the desk just needs to check your visa or your passport status to know that you are somebody safe to enter and come in. So this is the same concept that if you move away this whole, which is a very inefficient process of verifying and verifying by talking to people versus verifying by seeing the job you did.
Yeah. And actually, it's a bit like the Sybil thing, no? So, where if you can just, somebody who's an expert in a particular skill can be at a certain level of score. And then based on, how they've acquired, then you could benchmark and see where they are on different skills. I think it's a very interesting concept. Of course, it needs mass participation for it to work. And, there is a need, and
it's an idea which I would put as any digital record, right? I mean, when India started the citizen card, we went to the similar question whether it will be widely deployed, and I don't think we have seen all the possible use cases. So some of these will evolve as we experiment. But this is the same concept for a country of such size. There is no other way of verifying and quickly deploying. And the main part I wanted to stress is that this means that you can quickly deploy somebody, right? And you can hire a person just for that particular job instead of looking at. So some of our rules regarding employment, etc., will also need to evolve and change.
Yeah. There's a question from Rashi. Rashi, would you like to ask your question about the gig workers?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sriram. Hi, Richard. Rashi here. So good to see you.
Rashi, hope to see you soon.
Yeah. So my topic of interest has been gig workers in particular, and I was keen to know from the perspective of how, from a futuristic standpoint, technology will impact or enable gig workers specifically in India.
So Rashi, that's a good point, and it I'll take the concept of the skill passport further, right? If the skill passport is also tied up with a platform, and you need a platform, and just like the closest example I can give is, for example, Uber is a platform which people use to hire transportation. So similarly, if you have a platform where various skills are available for me to choose, and a skill passport is available for me to deploy the competence and the ability, the platform both connects the person who needs the service with the person who's able to deliver the service. Is able to choose among multiple people based on their the skill level and the location they need, and also provide the quick payment for the services rendered. So this platform enables gig work to happen at a much more rapid pace than what it is done today, because today you still have to onboard them to your platform, which is very difficult, versus enabling them or using them from a common platform. And that is why the whole gig economy will really take off if we have a single platform which can provide all this: connect, verify skills, employ, make the payment, post the employment, give feedback, in a way which is reliable and trustworthy. Now, I'm not saying this is not happening, but many of them are happening at a single platform level. Like, for example, in Bangalore, you have a platform which provides you with driver services or some other services, but there's no single platform across the country which will connect all services. And what is really missing, and I'm not saying it's very simple to do today, but technology is evolving so fast that it's only a matter of time where there'll be a single platform where it connects multiple services. And any one of us on this call who has run both work as well as households know the shortage and the requirement of various jobs which we want done, and there are similarly people willing to do those jobs. So it's just a matter of connecting the two, and it will take off. The question is who and which one. I don't really have an answer, because I don't claim to be a startup founder or anything like that, but I think it's just a matter of time. Skill passport is just one of those aspects which will largely work through the larger gig economy space. But I'm leaving this open to the audience also. It's not that I have answers to the entire gig question, but this is where I think the direction will go towards.
Yeah.
Sure, thanks.
And just to add, Rashi, I think one more thing. I mean, all of us in HR needs to also think about this whole concept of employer-employment relationship is likely to change, right, over the next few years. And there are many people who wonder, why should we be connected only with one organization? And many organizations are thinking the same. Right now, probably we are not fully there or not fully ready, but I think it's a matter of time where the thinking and the concept of the employment itself will change.
Yeah, and I think COVID has started that whole movement already, and I'm already seeing a few sites, especially which are promoting these fractional roles, from fractional CHRO to fractional other stuff, well-being officer, all of that, where you can do pieces of work, and now they're giving you access to a larger audience through their platform. So I think it's a matter of time. The connected piece probably will take time, but it's certainly in the works, and I think gig is already there. It's just going to become much more. And I think organizations eventually will look at the cost versus benefit, right? If they're getting good quality at a good price, they are not going to, kind of let it go as
also the speed.
Yeah, correct. Okay, so let's move to your next concept. Bharat, I'll come back to you because that ethical stuff that we're asking, actually, we want to cover a little later. We'll come back to that in a bit. All right. So I want to ask you about work creep.
Yeah. I am, and you know me as a manager, I've been very conscious of this whole thing coming in, and I hope that all the people who have worked with me have also similarly done that to people they work with. But it's very easy these days, and I see more of it happening, right? How many of us have gone through the example where we are ready to go home for the weekend, and then suddenly somebody dumps a project on the table which requires you to work over the weekend? Or for example, you might have to attend your child's play or something at school, and then again somebody makes it not possible. Could have been planned better. There will always be pieces of work which you couldn't have anticipated and couldn't have planned. I'm not meaning that. That I think all of us understand that there can always be an emergency where you can't anticipate. Work creep to me is an effort just for the want of planning lands up and causes disruption in somebody else's life. And I think I'm keeping the definition very limited. So as far as possible, as managers, as leaders, we have to avoid this due to our planning or due to our lack of efficiency. We end up by not anticipating the work, and I'm not counting the ones which you couldn't have seen. So I think that is the whole issue. And I speak to a lot of people both inside the companies I work with as well as outside, and there is a sense of tiredness, right? People are constantly on a treadmill, and there is no particular reason that why you should always be. There will always be certain times where you have to work in excess of what you planned, but your whole work life can't be a sense of being busy and sense of tiredness, because two things. One is, as humans, you do get tired. Secondly, the quality of work definitely suffers. And let's go by example of the airline industry, right? There's a reason why pilots have only a limited time they can operate an aircraft, because there's an issue. So similarly, there's no reason why people working in offices shouldn't have a certain kind of restrictions on how much they should work continuously. So it's the same concept, and much of this can happen without any much of difficulty if you just control this whole concept of work creep.
I think there's also, especially in India, where, you're somewhere, that the scarcity mindset is still at play, where, you want more. So in a way, I feel that it's not just the manager's problem. It's also the employee who's willing to do it. And very, because they feel that it gives them an advantage of doing it, right? So then it becomes...
It's only India. I think I've seen it in other countries also. So I don't think it's a country-specific issue anymore. It probably was at some point in time, but I see this now in many places, and I clearly don't know why. So, but the whole issue seems to be spreading, and I think this is becoming part of the global workforce.
Yeah, but it's certainly an aspect which is worrying, right? Because it puts undue pressure. People can't switch off. And even during COVID, that was one of the problems that people, the initial thing was there is no boundary. When work stops, that was easier when I was in office. But now at home, the moment I wake up, I'm looking at my computer or my phone, and then my mind gets hooked. And then...
No, I had this, I was seeing this. For a short period of time, I actually worked in a factory. And this was before cell phones and all that. So the beauty of the factory is that once the machinery goes off, you're not needed, or nor is anybody else needed, because nothing really happens, right? So then you're off. And I sometimes wish that you could do the same now, which of course much of it is wishful thinking, but still it's always worth thinking about.
All right. Bharat, I think you have a few questions. Why don't you kind of ask some of them?
Yeah, sure, sir. Thank you for this opportunity. So my question is more from human centricity. When it comes to the AI, it's already, we are having enough eruptions and adaptations. But when it comes to human centricity, we see that there is some gap in terms of mental well-being. So how we can leverage on the technology, and what are the priorities that HR should keep in mind to drive this mental wellness and employee experience, considering the disruption that is made by the AI?
So thanks, Bharat. I'll probably add a few points, but Sriram actually is the person who did more work on this particular area than I did. So I will allow Sriram to answer most of your question, but I'll probably give us a few opening comments. So many years ago, when Shriram and I used to work together, we realized that health was a big issue, which not many companies were paying attention to at the workplace. And when we talked about health, we both thought that it was to do with physical health rather than anything else, because that is what everybody was talking about. But when we actually analyzed the data and we spoke to people, we realized it was almost a 50-50 distribution. 50% was mental, 50% was physical. And then we realized that you cannot be healthy physically if you're not healthy mentally. And I think mental health became more important than physical, because if you're healthy mentally, then you do a lot of things which put you in a good position physically. So we shifted the priorities, and then we realized that there are very simple things you can do. And I'm not a professional on this subject, but I think we found that they were not very complex. They were simple things like learning to switch off, doing basic things like meditation, yoga, those kind of things, balancing your family and your work priorities. Switching off once in a while, those kind of things made a big difference. I'm not talking about the areas which require professional treatment. These are for normal, everybody fine kind of situation. There are, of course, there will be always situations where you require experts, but I'm not referring to those. But I'm just referring to the common ones. And then when we started focusing on it, we realized the impact it made on the workplace, and we kept learning. So, Sriram, I'll request you to add, because you've done considerable work in this area, and I think they should listen to you rather than me on this one.
Okay, all right. So I think one of the things that we had, of course, done was to, bring in the aspect of mental health very early on and try and influence it through a proactive approach, especially if you can build in habits which you can do on a daily basis that is likely to increase your resistance to a potential issue. And I think that is the approach that people need to, kind of take to deal with this. Now, from an organizational standpoint, of course, organizations can do a little bit more in terms of focusing more on the emotions and feelings and use it as a strategy. And I'm thinking as a team, there are largely three elements which, are important for well-being per se. And well-being is a holistic thing. One is, of course, is to align them to a purpose, give them, meaning. Second is to be able to have some kind of a social contract, agreements on behaviors, agreements on approaches. And the last is around psychological safety. If these three can be done, there is a better possibility of promoting well-being in the organization and in teams. Okay, so let's come back to you, Richard, on the thing. So let's talk a little bit about the the mobile phones and the extent of distraction. So you've covered distraction as a huge piece in your book as well. So why don't you give us your perspective on that?
Yeah, the rider and the apologies is, I don't want to sound like somebody who's old-fashioned and probably get bad publicity on this, but I'm probably one of the few people, and I know there are others on the call who probably worked when before the cell phone days, where it was very prestigious to have a cell phone, but the costs were so high that you were very careful on how much you used it. And it was definitely before the phone became a substitute for the screen. And I'll give you an example that we have become so dependent on it that if you take yourself away from that device, most of us will struggle what to do with that time. So, for example, if you are in a lift with many people, just look around you and see how many are looking at their phones. And I'm not even looking at who's around you. I'll give you a very curious story, and probably, Sriram, with your permission, the story is very funny. Is that I was boarding a flight in Delhi, and I had the window seat, and the person sitting at the aisle, whom I recognized, was somebody who has been trying to meet me for a very long time. And for various reasons, I've not been able to do the meeting. So I walked past this gentleman. I was in the same aisle. He was in the aisle and I was in the window. So there's a middle seat in between us. And this was a fairly long flight. Delhi to Bangalore is roughly 3 hours. Through the flight, he was busy with his phone and he never recognized that I was there on the same row. And he would have had 3 hours with me, undivided attention. And I never explained or told the gentleman that I was there on the flight with him. But that is how curious this whole technology has made. And I give you a very simple example. Now, take, for example, that you're doing something useful and you've finally got into the groove, and then your phone rings or it gives the more silly the messages. And then it takes away, and no matter how much you try, and experiments by psychologists have shown that it takes a certain amount of time for it to get back to the groove. And that's the whole thing. It's not whether it's good or bad. It's the question of it is a tool. We have to use it when we need it. But if you're going to let that dominate us, it is a different aspect. And look, professionals, the psychologists have told me that they're getting issues with families, with kids, because everybody is busy with their own devices, and nobody has conversations, to the extent that we might slowly, as the human race, be losing the art of conversation. So I'm not saying it's good or bad. I think there are times when it's an essential, it's a lifesaver, but there are many, and we can get a lot of our work done. It's a productivity tool also, but there are also times when we need to focus, we need to be away from it, and it's the classic case, right? Who's the master and who's the servant, and that's what we have to answer.
Yeah. I'm calling it the kryptonite, the one that takes away the power of the Superman. It's essential, no doubt, but I think, somewhere we've made it an extension of us, and it's become an extension that is, started controlling, how we operate.
So I gave some simple suggestions. I mean, those are not all in the book. There are multiple ones, and each of us, I think. And look, I'm not claiming to have solved this problem either. So I'm just this is something for all of us to work. I think each of us will come with our own solution.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on to the aspect of declining feedback. And I found it quite interesting. I didn't realize, that. And it's a very, nice way to kind of do it. And in all these years, I've probably, maybe intuitively, sometimes you do it, but I think as a frame, it's an excellent framework. So please explain the declining feedback model so that, people can get value out of it.
I don't claim that it's my original idea, but I just refined a concept which I found was interesting. Let's take, for example, if you're building something or you're designing something, and the manager or the person who's supervising should spend most of their time in the beginning giving feedback on how do they want the concept evolve, how do they want to look at it, and then allow the team to go ahead and build it. Many times we spend the least amount of time in the beginning of the project and allow the teams to do whatever they want. And when they come back and show it to us, we say, okay, this should have been like this should have changed, which would mean that the team has to do considerable amount of rework. Now, you can even go for, and I don't want to name the sports people who later on became coaches, but I have heard this from many cricketers who have told me that there are different approaches which coaches take, right? Some of them keep giving feedback when the player is actually ready to go and play, versus some coaches say, look, go and do what you want, because whatever work had to be done was done many months or many days ago. So there's no point in giving you feedback closer to the point of time when you're actually going to bat. So this is the same thing. So there's no point in me giving many, because I've had situations where a manager told me, okay, this color of this backdrop should have been blue. Well, it's too late in the day to make it blue, because the show is going to go on air in another 15-20 minutes. So this is all the point is. The declining is give the maximum feedback and whatever thoughts you have at the beginning, less and less as you go along. And also, as you go along, stick to feedback which can be easily incorporated, and don't give feedback which is very difficult to incorporate towards the later part. Unless, of course, it is something which is a security lapse or a showstopper, which of course then everybody accepts that. But in most situations, you don't need to keep till the end, which also means that a manager should spend considerable amount of time at the beginning of the project and less amount of time towards the later part, which also alludes to what you spoke in the beginning, is giving people freedom to operate, bring their own intelligence to deliver, and do what they think is the right thing.
Yeah, and I think the first fix with that suggestion is to actually do your first cut review much earlier than where you would normally do. Because what I would normally do is almost like a 90% finished product, and then you do the rework. It's a lot of time wasted for everybody, including the person who's doing it gets demotivated. But also I see the problem is there are two things. One is sometimes the person giving the brief doesn't have 100% clarity themselves. So they end up, kind of giving something, and then they hope it will evolve, and then it doesn't evolve the way they want it. And then, that's a thing. So where I found that whiteboarding your thoughts clearly and then explaining it piece by piece somehow, translates whatever. And in that process of whiteboarding, you also get a little bit clearer. The second,
Even
of course,
whiteboarding, design thinking, all of them use some concepts which are roughly similar, so they may not necessarily term it this way.
Yeah. And the second, of course, is your ability to communicate, because what we say and what people understand are two different worlds altogether. And unless, you are able to verify that what they understood is what you want, it's simple process of just asking them to explain it back to you. But many times we don't do it. And even now, I think sometimes I realize that, okay, my instructions are not clear as a and that's, I think, some of the things that we could work on as people. Okay, let's bring in a few questions. I think Siddharth has a question. Siddharth, why don't you ask your question, man?
Thank you, Sriram. Hi, Richard. So good to see you.
Siddharth, hi.
Richard, well, of course, I plan to buy the copy of the book very soon. My question to you is more around the, operating of various generations in the workforce simultaneously, which means that these generations come up with their own value system, their own belief systems. So do you see that as a conflict while operating in the workforce, or do you see that as an opportunity to collaborate? And maybe if I can add in, where does technology fit in, and how can we sort of come to a mutually agreeable terms?
So, Siddharth, I personally don't think it's a bad thing at all. I actually welcome the fact that different generations work, and today, I think we should be prepared for 3 generations to work at the same time, not only 2, because people are likely to work longer than they used to. So you will normally you'll end up having 3 generations in the workforce, and each generation brings its own concepts and learnings to the table. So to me, it makes the workplace that much more interesting, workplace that much more dynamic, because what I think will happen is this whole hierarchy which is there in today's workplaces based on your experience and your age is kind of going to get flattened. It is going to get flattened because technology, like you mentioned, is going to be a leveler. So there is no necessarily benefits, unless, of course, there are very limited professions, and those will be like a handful where experience and number of years will make a difference. But otherwise, the concept of organization hierarchy will kind of go away. So each of us will be recognized for the work you do, and then you could have multiple generations working together and learning from each other and benefiting from each other. So to me, it's not a bad thing at all. I think it's a great thing to happen, and I think we should all be ready. Which comes to the next point, is that we have to be open to learn, and the whole concept is learning is not hierarchical. Learning is you could learn from anybody, right? The young could learn from the old could learn from the young. It's not unidirectional, so it goes both ways. It's not hierarchical either. So I think we have to recognize that learning is both in both directions, and it's non-hierarchical. And if you accept that, I think this whole concept of this generation question will go away. And I personally don't think there's a value or an outlook issue. They might term different. I'll give you a interesting fact. I recently was looking, and I read a very long sentence. I don't remember the full sentence, but it said you know what it said? It said today's generations wants quick results. They want to become rich very quickly. They don't want to listen to the age-old ways of working. They don't have the patience and all that. And at the end of the sentence, I was surprised too that that sentence was written in 1950. So this story doesn't change. So I found that, and you could put it today, and it would fit perfectly. So it was written in 1950 when the post World War II guys started entering the workforce.
Yeah, very interesting. Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I agree.
I just wanted to add, I think the whole idea is to be flexible with your thinking and your approach, and not resort to labeling. So often, we start labeling a certain thing. Okay, they're entitled, they're like this, they're like that. And then it kind of takes you nowhere. But if you just, be open, and if you're willing to be flexible with how you operate, I think that should allow us to take advantage rather than, kind of finding fault with, what is wrong in the system. Richard, before we go into, I think we have a few questions on the chat, but before I go there, I want to cover this whole aspect of ethics. So you have the idea of the ethical map, and with AI also this ethic question kind of comes up, and also doing the right things right, the no right way to do, the wrong things and so on. So I want you to cover that, in a little bit of detail, and then we'll go to questions from the audience.
So I go back to why I added that chapter, though I was not very sure whether I should put a chapter at the end on ethics and how we operate. But you know, and since you know that much of the work I've done over many years has deeply to do with ethical questions which we face at the workplace, where you have a seemingly brilliant person who's at the top of their profession, top of their career, suddenly land up in a situation where they've taken a wrong decision, and either face a very complex situation which is a legal issue, or could just be a situation where they lose their job and they're forced to look for another job. And I started looking at why somebody so seemingly brilliant and who had everything going for them should go in a direction which was not required for just some quick gains. And the quick gains are, of course, that the end justifies the mean kind of argument. The end never justifies the means, because you would, when I spoke and I spent a lot of time with people who face these situations, and it always ends up with tears and feeling of regret, right? And I was thinking why you should do that. And it's very important when you start your career, and much of this chapter is written for somebody starting the career, is that whether you're taking very minor decisions or you're taking very major decisions, you cannot not have an ethical map. And ethical map is very simple. You have 3 dimensions. You have dimensions of your family, and I think that's the first thing. Anything you do, and the reason why you work is for your personal reasons, right? You don't work for much else, and you work to take care of family. Second is, of course, your work dimensions, that you will be recognized as a professional and you'll do the right thing. And the third is, of course, the larger societal framework, as whether it is SEC regulations or other guidelines. You put all these 3 and you plot yourself that for none of these you are going in the negative direction. You might be 0 or positive. So that is the whole concept of the ethical map on all these 3 dimensions, whether it's a family, work, or the larger society. You never go into the negative numbers on any of these dimensions. So your axis or your framework is always positive. Sorry for bringing a little maths into this, but the question is that when nobody's looking, whether you'll do the right thing. And that's all I ask people, that when nobody's looking, whether you'll do the right thing, because there's no right way to do the wrong thing, right? And that is what, and much of this is, though I've not mentioned any names in any of these situations, it is, I have dealt with or spoken to many people who have faced these situations. Actually, none of us should learn that way. It's easier to do the right thing.
Yeah. And I think the first thing is for people to actually, know their own values and, what principles they want to actually identify and live by, which I feel, it's a fundamental, requirement. Often,
the easy way I put it is that, right? Don't go negative on any of these 3 areas, then you should be okay. You could be 0, it's fine. That means you're still neutral. You don't necessarily have to be positive on everything. For example, if you're doing something on a government, you don't necessarily have to do extra. Just do what is. It's okay. It's okay to be 0, but don't be minus.
Yeah, correct. Good. So we'll take some questions. I think we have some fantastic questions over here. Let me go with Vijay. Vijay, can you ask your question, please?
Thanks, Sriram. Hi, Richard. Happy to see and put my question up front. So as we navigate in this intersection where between the human and AI, do you think organization will eventually need to create a new role, especially for ensuring the human accountability in the world, increasingly driven by algorithms? That's one part of it. Whereas the second part is, how can leaders ensure that decision made by AI still align with the emotional and ethical nuances of a human leadership?
Okay, I'll probably answer the second part first. See, much of this is evolving, right? The ethical uses of AI. There is a cross-functional collaboration in many universities, from the departments of philosophy, economics, ethics, technology, law, And I think much of the questions today, at least I've been spending a lot of time reading on this, are just questions, because we don't necessarily have answers as to how do we work on this evolving intelligence. And I'm terming it intelligence because just like many of the laws which govern people are also evolving, I think some of these concepts will evolve on based on these subject which we are all discussing. As to a question on new roles, I think definitely new roles will emerge, and some old roles might go away. But more importantly, I think there will be a specific department. And I'm just, Shriram, this is new. I have not explored this concept with anyone, so I'm throwing it for your channel first. Is that just like you have a human resource professional, you probably will have an AI professional who deals with the challenges. What if the bot comes tomorrow and asks for a hike or more leave, etc.? So let's see. Maybe some of us will get into that profession, just like some of us wandered into the HR profession today.
Nice. I like that one.
Thank you.
Okay, let's Saurabh, you want to ask your question?
Hi, Richard. Hi, Sriram. Good to see you both together. Hi. My question, we've talked about technology, we've talked about ethics, we've talked about work-life balance and all that. So I'm going a little ahead, another direction in terms of enabling people. We talked about sports coaches. That's where it triggered to me, is that is coaching a trend that we're going to see emerge big in India? And what are the in what way does HR really bat for coaching as an option? We've seen training, we've seen other methods, but is coaching really an avenue to explore going ahead? What's your thought on that?
So, Saurav, I will try and answer. I don't claim to have all the answer to this particular question. I do see agreeable disposition to using coaches among various professionals now. So whether I talk to CEOs or the next level, they are much more willing and ready to take coaching. Formerly, the idea was that the higher you go, that the resistance to using a coach was very high. People thought they knew everything and they didn't want to look like they needed help. But at least I see that change. I think people want to do better, and I think they take the ability and the help of coaches. There is also more coaches available now than there ever were before. So there are many people who are now willing to lend their time and energy to coaching others. But just like many wonder drugs, that it also comes with their own thing, right? Not every coach is the right one for you. So you might end up with a perfectly wrong coach, and who might be a bad thing. So it's not a very, what you call, field where you will have all the information. So if you choose right, the coach could make a big difference. If you choose wrongly, it may not really work. So I think somewhere this will fall into place. And I know there are firms and professional organizations who filter out and try and match the person with the coach. But I think it's still an evolving one. But at least the thought of having a coach is widely accepted. There are many more people doing this coaching. So I think it'll change. It will get better. But the fact to remember is that it's many of these things are not really coachable. A coach can only take you till a certain level. The rest of it, you have to still figure it out on your own, just like a sports person does. That extra edge, of course, has to come from the person itself, right? And that, I think, is the question.
Yeah. I think the problem is the moment the organization pushes somebody to get coached, that is a problem, because that invariably...
The person should... I at least have found that when a person asks, it's much better. It works better.
Great. Tivrata, can you ask the question?
Hi, Sriram. Hi, Richard.
Hi.
Just wanted to speak about rather than ask, because see, these days when we are all calling our employees back to work to return to office, and now that they've all tasted the work from home and mama's food and everything, it's very difficult for them to come back. And especially those, the ones that we are facing issues with is a lot of the senior managers who have elderly parents at home. So while we have these campus freshers who don't really get a choice and they have to do hybrid, but and the heads of the departments also come to office, but these senior managers who have, a very common set of age of parents, they do not really want to come back. And so this middle layer missing, How do you suggest we tackle that kind of a talent management?
I have an odd answer, and I'm not going to give the usual ones, which I'm sure you have the answers also. To me, the answer is, how do we measure productivity? And one of the things which all of us struggle is, how do we measure productivity at work? Because we don't know what a person is delivering, right? And whether they're delivering it from home or whether they're delivering it from office. This whole concept of measuring productivity is a very hazy concept in many of the professional environments which we work in. It's very easy to measure productivity if you're manufacturing something. It's right in front of you. So I think the answer to this, whether you should work from home or work from office, is measuring not only productivity but other things like satisfaction, engagement. There are various things, and I think data is there. It's a question of using the technology and tools we have to measure various dimensions. Are there teams doing better? Is a team which comes to work learning more? So unless you get all the data in place, otherwise, it comes down to you come to office because I tell you to come to office. And that's not going to be a great argument to use. Of course, you can use it. And many companies are using it, others will deduct your leave, those kind of arguments. But the fact is, if you have a better way of measuring these dimensions, which I spoke about, then you can't escape, right? Then if you need to come, you will come, because otherwise it impacts something else. And I personally don't think it is a company's problem to solve all these other issues you have, because those other issues were there before the pandemic also. So these are not something which happened today. So people always had aged parents or small kids and all that. And I look at it, right? The pandemic has given us an option, and technology has given us an option. So there's some part of work which you can do remotely, and I don't think it's a bad idea to use it, as long as you know how to measure and what to measure. So I think that's my answer.
Right. True. Thank you.
Shima, you want to ask your question?
Sure. Thanks so much, Sriram. Hi, Richard. And I think, my question mostly is, Richard, as all of us today are aware that as organizations, we are increasingly focusing on fostering a human-centric workplace. But I think what I've been thinking of late is, how can leaders ensure that this push for digital transformation and AI integration really doesn't take away or compromise, the human connections and the well-being that is really, really essential, in the way we're looking to thrive our culture at our workplace. So I just wanted to get your views.
So Shiva, the answer is in your question itself, right? It's a question of the leader, and it's a question of leadership, right? And I think human-centric leaders is been there since time immemorial, right? From the days before automation came into today, the human-centric leaders have always been there. They're there today. It's a question that whether you're lucky enough to find one or you don't find one. And I think in addition to what Saurav spoke about towards coaching, I think leadership development is another area which probably we're not spending enough time on, as to how to build leaders who are human-centric, either by observing other leaders or by coaching them to be more human-centric, because technology will come and go, assignments will come and go, work experience will come and go, but how you handle people, whether you're handling a team as a medical profession, you're handling a team as a software project manager, or you're handling a team as an HR person, I think the principles of leadership don't really change. There are many experts over the years who have talked about it by observing various other leaders. And I think no matter where you are, I think we can all be better leaders. And I think that is an area which we can all work on, no matter whether AI comes in or anything else comes in. I think there will always be want for people to treat each other at the workplace as humans and do better with them. And I think that is a good question that you asked.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks, Sriram, for the opportunity.
And I think, one of the things I've been looking at, Richard, is also this whole concept of, human-centric principles, where, because companies have largely operated with a set of values, which sometimes are limiting and, thing. But if that can be expanded into a more demonstrable behavior or daily experience, that is the, way to go in terms of experience on a daily basis. That's really what you believe in. And how do you make that experience better? If you can start with something that you believe in and get everybody to buy into it and then act on it, I think that's a way in which human centricity can get.
I agree.
Great. So before we wind up, any closing things anything that's, I know we covered just about half of what we thought we'll, kind of get to, perhaps only about a quarter of the book. Anything that is important?
I had no plans to cover the book anyway, because the book has to be right. I hope people like it. But the closing comments I have is, I think the questions were absolutely fascinating. None of them were out of place, and probably if I had some of these questions before I wrote it, I probably would have added some parts to the book. So I think I really enjoyed the interaction, and a special thanks to many people on the call, of course, who I know personally. So it was nice of you to come in spite of your very busy schedule. The only closing comment I have is keep thinking. Don't assume that these answers hold. Answers because much of what I have learned or Sriram has learned has come from listening and talking to other people. You should carry on the same learning to your teams and who you interact with. So that's the only request I have in closing.
Fantastic. So I'm going to show your book again, Richard, just so that people are able to see it. Richard Lobo, Human at Work, fantastic book. And it's a great read. I actually enjoyed it. If I don't, if you don't enjoy it, you can't actually get through the entire book. And I loved reading it. I hope people think it. But reading itself has become like a luxury nowadays. So I hope people the time and go through it and use some of those concepts over there. Thank you, Richard. Appreciate your time.
Thanks to everybody on the call.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. I want to thank My Startup TV also for broadcasting this across their platform and getting it to reach a larger audience. Thank you, everybody, for joining. See you again on the next call. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Sri.